All right, party people. So today I wanted to make this video, and hopefully this video will be your ultimate guide to fixing the second gear transmission crunch that happens on the Civic Type R. It'll also help alleviate some of the notchiness or gear lockouts. So hopefully you can use this video and apply it to your car, and I hope that it fixes any problems that you might be having with your Civic Type R's shifting. Before we get into how you do it, let me just give you a brief explanation of my experience with the Civic Type R and gear crunches. So I bought my Honda Civic Type R brand new off the lot in September of 2019. It only had about 6 miles on it. I currently have about just over 6,000 miles on the car, but during the first 5,800 miles, I only experienced a second gear grind maybe 5 or 6 times. Of those times, I would say about 4 of them, I caught myself shifting before my foot was all the way to the floor. And then the other 2 times were just genuinely strange because I knew that I had my foot to the floor. It really wasn't a big deal because it didn't happen very often at all. I mean, 5,800 miles and maybe 5 or 6 grinds, that's not a lot. But it wasn't until this past February of 2021 that it started to concern me. Back in early February of 2021, I took a 200-mile road trip. During that road trip, I experienced a second gear grind twice, and I wasn't doing anything crazy. I was just taking off from a red light. I was like, wow, that's really strange, like 2 in a day. I mean, granted, I put a lot of miles on the car that day, but 2 in a day, that was a lot. And it started to kind of concern me, but it just didn't happen again for a couple days. And then later that same week, I experienced it again. And all 3 of these times, I was driving normally. I wasn't redlining it or anything like that. And I wasn't trying to shift fast. And I knew that all 3 of these times, my foot was to the floor because I've trained myself to do that. Oh, there was a grind. And then towards the end of February, I had my car retuned by Redstar Motoring on ethanol, and it really gave it a lot more power. And I like to test all the 0 to 60 times before and after mods, just to see if they make a difference, because it's the only measurable test that I can legally do on the streets and put on video without getting in trouble. And so I always just test 0 to 60 times. Right now, I have about 150 launches on this car from the day I bought it. And I thought that was kind of crazy. And the only reason I know that is from my Draggy module. And my Draggy module shows like 160 something, but 20 of those launches were with my Camaro Z01. And then I know that there's been 2 days that I've gone out to try different launches and 0 to 60 times without the Draggy. That adds about another 10 to it. So about 151 launches that I know about that I've done on this car. So you can't say that I've really been all that easy on this car. And so as I got the car tuned, I went out to go test the 0 to 60 time. There was like a day that I went out and tested it. I could not shift into second gear when I was hitting close to red line without grinding.
Don't mind me, birds. I'm just trying to record. Yeah. Oh yeah, just fly in front. Yeah, just rub it in. Okay, screw you guys. Ooh, that was a bad grind. Okay, that was a legit grind, right? Ooh, there was a grind. Okay, had a grind there. Okay, that grinded. Whoa, that does not want to work.
But nonetheless, I wasn't able to do my 0 to 60 pulls. I couldn't do a spirited pull without grinding. And that was like, okay, this is probably a problem. And so I made it my mission after that to fix it. And I think I pretty much have it 100% fixed. And I'm gonna show you exactly what I did to fix it. So the first thing I did to fix it was change the transmission fluid. I always had the OEM transmission fluid in it. The only shifter upgrades that I had done to the car was I did the Acuity full shifter drop-in. I did the Acuity shifter cable bushings, which those are some amazing mods. Like if you want a really good feeling shifter, I have videos on that and I'll link it below. But I figured with 150-ish launches, it was probably time I changed the transmission fluid. So I reached out to my tuner and I asked him what transmission fluid that I should use. What does he recommend? Because he, Redstar Motoring, they build 10-second Civic Type Rs all day long, and some of those are running on stock clutches. He told me to get Motul Multi ATF. I will put links in the description where you can pick that up. I'll also have links for other stuff. As we go through this video, you're gonna see tools and things that I've used. I will put links for everything down in the description in case you wanna pick it up for yourself. There seems to be kind of a debate on which fluid is the best. Some people argue that the Motul Multi ATF doesn't doesn't work well with brass synchros. And that's what we have in our Civic Type R's is brass synchros. And those people say get Adelco Synchromesh friction modified. I'm not dogmatic on these fluids, guys. Like if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I'm probably gonna try the Adelco in the future. Do your own research, but for the sake of this video, I'm using Motul Multi ATF. So I ordered 2 quarts of that and I went to change my transmission fluid. Now this is how you change your transmission fluid. I'm gonna show you guys some B-roll of me doing it. You're gonna need either a lift, jack stands, or ramps. I did mine on ramps. I don't trust jack stands. To change your transmission fluid is actually really simple, guys. Super simple. First thing you need to do, put your car on some jack stands or something like that. Then you need to remove your air box. If you don't know how to remove your air box, I do have a video where I show how to install an air box, and that video shows you how to take it out. If you have an aftermarket air box, you already know what to do. You need to pull your air box out. Underneath your air box, you'll see a bolt. Okay, so looking down here, you see your batteries right here. If you come straight down and you see that extension sticking out, that's your top fill plug. You literally don't need a bit or anything. It's just you're just gonna use this square 3/8 inch drive. Just gonna stick it right into there, probably get another extension, or a breaker bar, or a good socket wrench. We're gonna loosen that. Then you're gonna go to the underside of your car and you're gonna remove the pan. This is what your under pan looks like. You will see that I have 2 screws circled. Those are both Phillips heads. You're gonna need to unscrew those with a Phillips head screwdriver. And then you're gonna need to unscrew, you don't have to screw them all the way. You literally just do a half turn and then they come out. Once you have those out, you're gonna pull down on the pan and slide it towards the rear of your car and it will come off completely. On your driver's side, you're gonna see your transmission and it's gonna have another one of those plugs and drain plug that was shaped just like the one on the top, and you're gonna use the same extension and you're gonna pull that one out. These ramps that I have aren't quite tall enough for me to really fit underneath it, but I couldn't really get all the way up underneath it to really get the torque on a ratchet to loosen the bolt. And so what I did, now I don't suggest this for retightening it, but I have this impact here, an electric impact, and I just put a little 3/8 inch adapter on it and just hit it real quick just to break the bolt loose. I positioned the drain pan right underneath it and took it out, and now it's draining. Then I put the plug back in and then I filled it with 2 quarts of the Motul Multi ATF and using a funnel. I then went on a couple of test drives a couple of different days. I wanted to get this fluid broken in and heat cycle it a couple times just to see if it was really gonna be a fix. And I will say this, it 100% eliminated the random grinds that I was getting, like when I would take off from a red light and it would just randomly grind going into second. So that was a good thing. But then I had to test it again doing launches. So I went out to the middle of nowhere, did about 5 or 6 launches. And the first day doing the launches, I may have had 1 grind out of 7 launches, which was really good because prior to that, I was having like 5 grinds out of 5 launches. It was pretty bad. I found that to be a success and I was like, okay, cool, this is working. Let me go back out and do some more 0 to 60 tests so I can see if this ethanol is making a difference or not. So the next day I went and did another 0 to 60 test and I started getting more grinds. It seemed as this fluid got a little bit hotter to grind, got a little bit worse. And I was like, oh man, maybe this didn't fix it. But at least it fixed all the random grinds. Like I can't get a random grind, driving normally at all. The only time I was getting grinds was during launches. So I was like, okay, maybe something else is wrong. I don't know. So I came home, did some more research, and then I don't know why I didn't think of this earlier because I did this fix to my 8th gen Civic Si like 10 years ago. I checked the CMC plunger behind my clutch pedal, and I'll throw a picture up of what that looks like. And on this picture right here, this is your clutch pedal, and you'll see where this arrow is pointing, that is your CMC plunger. And you wanna move it back and forth, like towards the rear of your car and the front of your car, and you wanna see if there's any play in that. If there is play, you're gonna need to make some adjustments. If there's no play, you're gonna wanna leave it alone. Mine had quite a bit of play. What you have to do is, you can't see the nut right here, but I'll show an arrow pointing to it. There's a 12mm bolt back there. And you gotta remember, this bolt is being threaded backwards, like coming towards you. So your righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, all that's reversed. So in order to loosen that nut, you're gonna have to turn it to the right from your perspective of looking at your pedal. And then what you gotta do is you gotta reach up there and grab that plunger rod, and you're gonna turn it with your fingers like this to the right until you meet resistance. Then you're gonna re-tighten it back down and drive it. This is where I kind of made a little bit of a mistake, but we will come back to this in a second. I didn't know it was a mistake at the time. So I adjusted my plunger, went back out. It was grinding less on my launches, but nonetheless, if I didn't shift just right, it would grind going into second every time I would go to launch it. And I was like, man, there's gotta be something else. And so I came home, I texted a few people asking them what they thought, and they're like, hey, did you delete your clutch delay valve yet? And I was like, no, I didn't know what that was. Now your clutch delay valve is kind of just there as kind of like a buffer so that your drivetrain doesn't get a lot of shock when you're shifting gears and mashing the gas. It just gives a little bit of a delay so that your transmission isn't that hard, doesn't shift hard. A lot of people said when they deleted theirs that they had really good success with it. So I'm gonna show you how to do the clutch delay valve right now, and then we're gonna come back and talk about the mistake I made and how I ultimately fixed everything. This is the most difficult shifting modification that you can do, but it is 100% worth it. In order to do this, you're gonna need to remove your entire intake and your intake tube that goes right here. And you may or may not have to remove this lower intercooler tube. I don't know yet, we're gonna look into that. Let me zoom you in. Okay, so you see those two bolts that are in focus right here. That is your slave cylinder, and we need to remove that. In order to do that, we gotta remove those two bolts and something else. And let me show you a couple of things about this before we actually get to that. I'm gonna change the angle on you that way to be a little bit easier to describe. Okay, so a couple of things to understand about the Civic Type R is on older Civics, your brake reservoir and your clutch reservoir were two separate reservoirs. This time, on the Civic Type R at least, they're using the same reservoir. And I was just kind of looking at mine and I noticed that my fluid was a little bit low. The reason that's important is after we remove this slave cylinder and delete the CDV valve, we're gonna have to bleed the system just to get any air bubbles out. So, in order to remove this slave cylinder, we got to take those two bolts off. So this here is our intercooler tube. I took the clamp off just in case I need to remove this. But this line that's right here is actually what pushes fluid into our CDV valve. So we need to unhook this over here. Now, from the videos I've seen, one gentleman said if you try to remove this nut right here, you're gonna need to use heat, like a torch or something, to break it loose because it's Loctited. The downside to using a torch is if you heat too much, you could blow up your brake line and shoot brake fluid everywhere. The other option that I've seen from people is to remove the nut next to it. That takes this bracket off and you'll be able to lift this up out of here and then remove a different nut that's attached to the slave cylinder that's not Loctited as hard. As we go through this though, I'm gonna be talking about some of the tools I'm using. I'll make sure to put links down in the description where you can pick everything up that we're gonna be using today. I got a set of these hose pinchers. The reason I got these is the line that's below that nut that we gotta undo is a rubber hose. And you can simply lock this onto it without damaging the hose. And we can limit how much brake fluid leaks out when we remove it. Another tool that we're gonna need are these boxed in wrenches in various sizes. I suggest 8 and 10 millimeter, but we'll find out more as we go through the process. I'll have links to these below. The reason you want these instead of a standard open-ended wrench, from what people have told me, if you try to undo like nuts that are on these lines with a standard open-end wrench, you'll round them off. So you need these kinds. Other things we're gonna need is Honda Genuine DOT3 brake fluid. I bought 2 bottles of this and I got a pretty good deal on it. Got free 2-day shipping and all that cool stuff. So I'll have links for that down below. Now I've never done this before guys, so I might make some mistakes. So if you see any mistakes, I don't care if you put those mistakes down in the comment section. That just helps everybody learn. I'll try to notate any mistakes that I make if I happen to see them. But the first thing that I want to try to do is instead of trying to remove this nut here, I want to try to remove this nut here. All right, so that little nut that's on the left here is a 10 millimeter. If you're going to use a socket with an extension, you're going to need a deep socket. I have a deep socket, but the problem is I don't have an extension that fits it. So I'm going to have to use one of these little box wrenches here. All right, be careful getting that out. Otherwise, you're going to have to raise the car and drop that pan that's underneath it. Once that's out, we should be able to lift this off, but not until we loosen the bolts that are actually on the slave cylinder. Now I could be wrong, but I'm gonna try a 12mm on this slave cylinder. Yep, and that's what it is. So you're just gonna loosen those 2 bolts, and they are pretty tight. There's 1, there's 2. Put my hand down there to hopefully catch this screw so it doesn't drop. Set that to the side, get the other one. Number 2, because that's off, we should be able to lift this. Might have to remove this intercooler tube. I was hoping I wouldn't have to. Now, it won't be that easy unless you have like this particular kit. Now that I got that off, I could pull this. There we go, and get that out. And you'll notice that I also have like, it's a coffee can that's down there to catch any brake fluid that might leak out. So from here, I'm gonna set that there. I'm gonna take this piece here that I'm using to pinch the line, and I'm simply going to install it right here. The reason I wanna do that is to prevent a ton of brake fluid from coming out. Also, I'm gonna grab some eye protection and some black nitrile gloves, just in case any comes out and I don't want it getting all over me or my hands. And also to note, brake fluid will eat your paint, so be careful not to get it all over your paint. All right, black nitrile gloves, eye protection right here. Put those things on. You'll also notice that I put a towel over my intercooler hose. That way I don't accidentally leak any brake fluid into it. Okay, so you're gonna need a 17mm wrench right here. Then we're gonna need a 12mm wrench right here. And we're simply going to try to pull these together to break that. Hopefully this works. Here we go. All right, there it is. Now it's off, and thankfully my wrench caught this line. And what I'm gonna do, I got a rubber band around my wrist here. I'm gonna pull my glove off all over that. I'm gonna pull this rubber band off, and I'm gonna tie this off with the rubber band so I don't leak brake fluid from the line while we're working on deleting this clutch delay cylinder. Now you can just leave that right there because it's all sealed off. All right, so looking at the slave cylinder, on this side you'll notice there's 2 roll pins. I'll zoom in for you. There's one here and one here. And I'm gonna drive those out. So I'm gonna use this roll pin punch right here. I have a whole set of these. I'll put a link in the description where you can pick them up. And I'm using this little mallet guy. I'll put a link for that too. You simply just tap it. Tap this side. Now the problem is when you start driving those out, they're gonna start driving into the body of your slave cylinder. And so the way you do that, the way you kind of overcome that, guy, is you take some needle nose here, reach in there, and kind of just pull that out just a little bit. You're gonna do the same thing to the other side. Pull that out just a little bit. The way I do this is I kind of keep my needle nose down there and just hit that out just like that. Be careful, they do kind of fly. I'm gonna do the same thing here. There it is. And they will kind of scratch up the body of your slave cylinder, but that's not the biggest deal. Now what's cool about that is now we can pull that out. Now something that I found that helped me get this snap ring out is just a little bit of oil. You can use household oil. I'm using gun oil, but it doesn't really matter. It's just gonna help it slide out just a little bit and help you get your hooks up underneath it and behind it so you can pull it out. And so there is an end right here for my snap ring and an end right here. The way I'm gonna do this is I'm gonna stick this one down into the middle of the snap ring and push down. There we go. And so I held pressure down with one side and I got up underneath the snap ring with the other side. And you can see it started to pop up there. Now the important thing is to keep that going. And it went flying somewhere. It's on the floor somewhere and I'm not worried about it right now. Now one thing I kind of learned while I was trying to take this thing apart was a lot of people say to pull this out using needle nose. Well, I can't get a grip on it. I don't know why. So that's why we took off this side. We're simply gonna take our punch here that we used earlier, and we are just gonna punch right through, just like that. And then this piece comes right out. And then our delay valve is actually that plastic piece. And what's cool about this method is I can simply just come through here and push it out. There it is, delay valve is out. And then we simply take this piece, pop that back in. We're gonna take a punch here, we're gonna take a roll pin punch. And then what's cool about these roll pin punches is they have a little nipple on the end, and the roll pins have a little hole. So the nipple fits right into that hole so it doesn't slide off of the roll pin. But get one started, get the other one started, then we'll just hammer them on in. The bigger side goes in, you simply pop that back in, just like that, and then place your snap ring back into place and then reinstall it on your car, which we're gonna do now. All right guys, we're about ready to reinstall it. I did wanna make a couple of mentions here. Don't let this snap ring ruin your day. It takes a long time. Even once you've learned how to get it out, it takes a long time. One of the main problems that I found with getting this retainer ring out is the fact that your standard picks aren't really thin enough to get behind it. So you kind of, if you want, you can file down your picks to make them thinner. That seems to be the biggest issue. Another thing too is if you don't want to take this completely off to pull that out, to pull out the delay valve, you can literally take a small drill bit and just push it straight through. The reason I wanted to do it that way, you don't want to scratch the inside of these walls here where that delay valve is, by sticking a pick down there and missing and scratching the wall, or sticking, needle nose down there. So I tended to just push it through. That's another way to do it also. Also too, make sure to put some more grease on this end point right here. I already did that. All right guys, so now we need to bleed the clutch system. And it's the same thing as bleeding like our brake system, for example. This reservoir right here that is for our brakes is also for our clutch. And you can see that some of my fluid is a little bit low. I probably should have kept a better eye on it. First, we're gonna top that off with some fresh brake fluid. And then I picked up this guy called a Power Bleeder. I'll throw a link down in the description if you guys want to pick one of these up. I also picked up this cap here. And what this cap does is you take this cap off, you put this cap on, and the Power Bleeder connects to it. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna push fluid through the system, and there is a bleeder. And you may have noticed on the slave cylinder, there is a bleeder. And there's usually a rubber cap on it. So we're gonna pull that rubber cap off. The kit includes a tube, but it's not long enough for my liking. So I bought a little bit of a longer tube, and that tube is gonna be going into this Gatorade bottle. This Gatorade bottle, I'm gonna fill it with a little bit of water, and it's gonna show me when all the air is out of the line. One of the first things that you're gonna have to do though, is we gotta take this screw top off of this hose and replace it with this. Some more brake fluid in here. There's that bad boy. Did get a little bit low, not too bad, but just a little bit. And now I'm gonna replace that cap with the new cap that I've attached to the Power Bleeder. All right, and now what I wanna do is I'm gonna pump this up to 13 foot-pounds, and we're gonna see how well it holds pressure. All right, so I got it up to 13 foot-pounds. And I'm just gonna watch that needle. I just wanna make sure that it's holding pressure. That means we got a good seal. So now I'm gonna take this tube because it's longer, and on the slave cylinder that's on the car, we're gonna pull the rubber boot off, and we're gonna place this over it. Then we're gonna take an 8mm wrench and we're gonna loosen it. But before we do that, I'm gonna have the end of this hose running into this bottle of water. And when I see that there's no more bubbles, I can tell that we've got pretty much all of the air out of the line. You wanna keep your eye on this reservoir. You do not want it to go empty while you're bleeding it. that would be bad because then you're introducing more air. But we simply just leave that alone. That's gonna apply the pressure for us. And you're gonna need an 8mm wrench in order to turn the bleeder. Is I'm gonna hold my bottle right here. I'm gonna drop my hose from the bleeder, down into the bottle so I can see it. My hose still isn't quite as long as I'd like. I probably should have got a longer hose, but nonetheless, I can still see the water. Then we're gonna take our 8mm wrench and we're gonna turn the bleeder valve to the left to open it up. We're gonna see what happens. And I can see bubbles forming in the bottle and they have stopped. And then when you see the bubbles stop, what you're gonna do is just retighten that bolt and then try it again. Also keeping an eye on your reservoir. Okay, now I'm gonna retighten it and I'm gonna pump my bleeder back up to 13 foot-pounds. Now I'm gonna do it again. Tighten it back down, and I believe we are golden, pony boy. Now we're gonna take our bleeder back off. I'm also gonna double check to make sure that I got this bleeder valve kind of retightened properly. The Torq specs on it, I believe, is 5.9 foot-pounds, but I don't know anybody that can fit a Torq wrench back there. Now we're gonna put our little cap back on it. I'm gonna remove our tank from the reservoir. And then I'm just gonna refill it. Just top it off a little bit. Put that back on there. Now we just need to reinstall our intake, take it for a spin and see how this whole thing works. So let's recap real quick before we go forward. That way you can keep up with everything. So far on the car, I had done fluid change. I adjusted the CMC plunger rod, and I had done the clutch delay valve. And I went back out in the desert to do more 0 to 60 tests because the only time I was getting grinds was when I was trying to do a launch. And it was a ton better, but it wasn't perfect yet. I still had to hold my foot down for like a split second longer than I usually do to shift. And as a result, my 0 to 60 times were a lot slower. And I was like, well, this still isn't quite a fix, but it does feel a ton better. I do like having that clutch delay valve removed. It doesn't feel any different until you're really getting on it. It just feels like your shifts are more immediate, if that makes any sense. Like when you let off the clutch, I feel like the transmission engages faster, which is a good thing. So I'm a little bit bummed that my second gear grind for launches isn't fixed yet. Came back home and I was a little bit bummed out. I was like, man, I guess it's a Synchros. And I didn't want it to be a Synchros because that's literally like a $1,500 job. That's just replacing like one Synchros. And not only that, it's really hard to find the Synchros for the Civic Type Rs, especially the second gear one, because a lot of them have been replaced. And like I was telling you earlier about how some people are starting to think that the Synchros is actually the issue. You're just gonna replace it with an OEM one, and then eventually, if you continue driving it, it's gonna have the issue again. So I started going through the forums again, and I saw something that I missed regarding the CMC. So when I adjusted my CMC plunger, I did that part correctly, but there was another step that I missed that I should have done. If you look at this photo right here, this is your pedal play adjustment. Apparently, if you only adjust the CMC plunger and you don't adjust the pedal play, what happens is you're putting more pressure against your pedal, right? But your pedal needs to come back out just a little bit more so that your clutch is fully disengaged. And I didn't do that. And one of the guys on the forum said, he's like, I adjusted my plunger, I still got grinds, and then I realized I had to change this and I never got a grind again. So what you have to do is take a 17mm wrench and you need to loosen that jam nut. And then on this nut right here, you wanna take a Sharpie, put a little mark on it, just so you can have a reference point. And you wanna make one full rotation to your left. And you can do it with your hand once you break that jam nut. So you're gonna do one entire 360-degree turn, tighten that jam nut back down. Then you're going to need to adjust your plunger rod, because once you start backing it out, it's gonna loosen the plunger rod. So you wanna do this part first, then you wanna use your 12mm, loosen up that plunger rod, turn it with your fingers until it meets resistance, tighten it back down. After I did that, I went back out into the desert, did 8 launches in a row, and not one single grind at all. And I was blown away. I was like, oh my God, I finally fixed it. I don't think that this is the root cause of the problem. I think that when these cars come from the factory, that Honda's just they know that some people are gonna race it, some people aren't. But I think they just put it on the economy settings in regards to the adjustments of the pedals and all that stuff. And I think some people, maybe their car was adjusted right, that's why they never got the second gear grind. Or I think in my experience, I didn't get the grind, for the first 5,800 miles hardly, but I think over time, parts and bolts and stuff, they tend to get hot and expand and contract, and possibly it just needed to be adjusted. So now that I've done all of that, not only do I not get the second gear grind anymore when just driving around town, I can now launch the car and shift. And I still get a little bit scared shifting just because I've had so many grinds trying to shift when launching. But man, it's really starting to give me more confidence knowing that I can shift into second and third when I'm doing a launch without grinding. So if I was gonna do this all over again, before you change your fluid, before you delete your CDV, this is the order I would do. First, adjust your pedal, okay? Adjust that pedal play, adjust that CMC rod, go test it. If you don't get a grind the first test, give it a couple of days. Drive it in different types of ways. Do some normal driving. Try driving into a corner and then shifting into second mid-corner. Some people have said that when your car starts tilting, sometimes that can instigate a grind. I haven't experienced that, but some people say that. But just give it a couple days if you don't get a grind. If you do start getting a grind and it's coming back, then change the transmission fluid using either the Adelco Synchromesh, which I will have links for down in the description, or the Motul Multi ATF. And then if you're still getting the grind, do the clutch delay valve delete. Like I said, that's the most difficult modification to do, but it is worth it. But man, holy cow, getting that snap ring out is one tough mother, But once you get it out, you got it out, you pull out the clutch delay valve, you put it back in, put the snap ring back in, and you're good to go. Then you just bleed your system and you're fine. But nonetheless, I'm very excited and very pleased that I don't have to go get my transmission yanked apart and have the synchros replaced yet. I mean, I'm not saying I won't have to in the future, and I'm pretty sure that I have more launches on my car than most people. But I want to know something from you guys. Let me know your thoughts about this down in the comments section. For those of you who have experienced a grind, I know Flying Gato has experienced it. He has a video on fixing it and stuff. I want to know what your experiences are and what was the one thing that was like, yep, that fixed it. For me, the one thing that fixed everything was just adding one turn of free play to my clutch pedal. Really strange. But I got a lot more content coming on the Type R, and I got a lot more coming in the future. So if you want to see that, just hit the subscribe button. But until next time, I love you and you guys stay sexy.